Greetings. This is Chaplain's Compass. This is a podcast where we are navigating spiritual care and spiritual health and practice. I'm John Betts.
And I'm Elise Tremaine. And John, I am so excited we have our first guest today on the podcast. Feel like we should have like a sound applause.
The heavens are opening.
Yes. So today we are talking about the new rubric for certification with APC at the Association of Professional Chaplains and BCCI. So we are talking with Stacy Auld, who's the System Director of Spiritual Care and Values Integration at Houston Methodist, and she also serves as the Chair of the Commission of Certification at BCCI. That's a mouthful, Stacy.
It is. There's a lot going on there.
Thank you so much for coming and speaking with us, spending some time with us this morning. We're so excited to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Maybe we can start just by getting to know you a little bit. How did you come to chaplaincy? What was your journey to chaplaincy? And then becoming the Spiritual Care Director and Values Integration at Houston Methodist?
So I was not always in ministry. I went to Texas A&M for my undergrad, and I was a business major while I was there. I was actually in accounting and management and really not involved in a local faith community. I had grown up United Methodist, but just didn't make it a priority during college. Went to the Dallas area and got my first job working for Zales Jewelers. Their headquarters were there in the Dallas area. And so for 8 years, my first 8 years of kind of a professional life, I worked for Zales in their corporate office and was ultimately one of their buyers. I was the gold earring buyer. That was fun. It afforded me lots of opportunity to travel, to run my own team of people, buy an office, oversee a $2 million budget. And it was just fun. Designed my own earrings, went and got to travel internationally and back and forth to New York a lot, working with a lot of the vendors. But the whole time I was working there and climbing this corporate ladder, was also becoming very involved in my local United Methodist Church there in Plano at the time, and ultimately felt a call into full-time youth ministry. I had worked with the youth and done a lot of mission work in Mexico right across the Texas border, and experienced my call into ministry through that mission work in Mexico. And so I left my career there at the age of 30 and went to divinity school to get my master's of divinity. Came back to that same local church. They hired me as a full-time youth pastor. And the one thing that I wanted to do when I was at Duke that I did not fit into my schedule was do a unit of CPE. I had lots of friends that had done CPE there as part of their curriculum. And I heard those stories in the hospital setting, and there was something that really was drawing me in. But I also wanted to kind of soak in the professors and learn as much as I could. And so I said, you know what, I can do this once I get back to Dallas too. So I negotiated that with my senior pastor that hired me. I said, after I've been here a year, will you let me do a unit of CPE? And so he agreed to that. And I couldn't wait for that year to come around. And so I applied and did an internship at Children's Medical Center in Dallas. And so that was my first experience of CPE, was during an internship there. And through that 9-month extended unit, while I was still working full-time, really thought, you know what, this may have been the thing that God was calling me out of the corporate world and into. But to figure that out, I did a residency. And instead of staying there in Dallas, I made a move to Houston. So I did my residency at Houston Methodist, which is where I still serve. And so I've been here for 15 years. So started as a chaplain resident, moved into a staff chaplain position, and then for 7 years served as the director of spiritual care for our medical center location. And then almost 2 years ago, moved into the system director role. So we have soon to be 9 hospitals, each having their own director and their own team of chaplains. And so my role is to kind of make sure we're all aligned. Values integration is a big part of my role, to make sure that as we grow, that we continue to maintain our culture and our spiritual history. We're still actually, Houston Methodist is one of 3 Methodist hospital systems that are still actually affiliated with the United Methodist Church. And so I am a United Methodist elder, ordained elder. And so it's a unique role for me to actually serve in a hospital that's very much so connected to my faith group and my church world here, and can serve as a liaison between the hospital and our conference here. So that's me. That's where I've been for these last 15 years.
That's really interesting to especially hear about, starting out in pediatric chaplaincy, doing your CPE. That's a great training ground because being able to work with all the family systems that take place.
Right.
And then moving to the Houston area and working there for 15 years, rising through various different experiences. That's a powerful experience.
Thank you.
It's super interesting. I wonder, Stacy, what was it about that first internship that tugged at your heart that made you think, well, maybe this is my calling?
Honestly, it was such a stark difference from what I was doing in the local church. And I was on staff at a large United Methodist church. And so our youth ministry program was about 900 kids. There were probably about 450 that were active. So it was a lot of rah, there was depth there, but we also had to maintain some wild programming to keep people engaged, right? And what I really wanted to do was just sit with the kids and listen to their struggles, kind of help them navigate what it meant, teenage years. And I couldn't spend the time doing that because I had to do so many other things to run the program. And so when I had these on-call shifts in the hospital and I actually just got to be with people and sit with people and journey alongside of them, that was so fulfilling for me. And just like many of us as chaplains experienced, no one could understand why it brought me so much joy to sit with people that were in so much pain and to be with these parents that were, devastated over a diagnosis or an illness with their child. And I felt so full after serving an on-call shift. And my clergy friends at the time, they're like, not everyone feels that way. There's a lot of people, pastors, who do those hospital visits but don't love it. And so if you are loving it the way that you are loving it, I think that is where you are probably meant to be. So
I can relate to that, just doing an internship as a youth minister, right out of seminary. Yeah, the energy required for being a youth minister versus being a chaplain definitely is different. Not that we're not energetic as chaplains, it's just a different kind of energy.
Going with what you're saying, I agree. It's one of those things where I've talked to some people at certain seminaries and grad schools. Some people put off doing their CPE until the very last minute because they're afraid of it or whatever. And a lot of people realize when they're doing their CPE, oh my gosh, why did I put this off? This is fantastic.
So Stacy, how did you get to be involved with BCCI and the Commission of Certification and now serving as a chair? What is your role with that?
My involvement started, often we start doing things because we're invited to do them, right? Somebody asked us to do something. And many people in our APC world know Bob Kidd. He's one of our past presidents, and he was my director and who I reported to for those until he retired a couple of years ago. And so he was very involved in APC. So he was an advocate of that and was like, every chaplain that he had on staff, he was like, you need to get involved. And so I think I started out volunteering to be on small committees that were planning the annual conferences. And so I did that a couple of years in a row, then was invited to consider what it would be like to be on the commission on certification. So I did apply for that and was given an opportunity to serve on the commission. I had been on the board of ordained ministry for my church for about 10 years. And so I really had a passion for that, what it looked like to articulate competency for being a United Methodist pastor and listening to interviews. And so I was like, well, I love this so much with my kind of clergy work. This makes a lot of sense why I would be drawn to the certification process for my professional organization. And so I served on the commission. I don't remember exactly. I think it was 2018 when I started serving on the commission and did some different things with that. I was the faith group application reviewer. So any organization that wanted to be considered as an official endorsing agency by APC, I would review those applications and work with different organizations to get them into a place where they met all of our requirements to do that. And then after I was doing that for a little bit, was invited to be on the board of directors. I'll be honest, the first time I put my name out there, I wasn't invited to be on the board. There was just an encouragement to continue to serve and to get a little more experience. I didn't have any board experience anywhere else. And so I did try again a couple of years later. And so I joined the board in 2021, I think, and was still serving on the commission. And then soon after, there was some different transitions that were happened very quickly within that first year of me being on the board, that the chair position for the commission opened up. And I had been on the commission the longest and really had a passion for it. So I was like, you know what, if I'm going to, of all the things I've learned in a short amount of time about what the work of the board is, the commission work is what I had the most passion for. And so I stepped into that chair role, and I've been in it for now a little over 2 years. Have really enjoyed, again, it's a lot of work. It's a never ending, process improvement, right? That's what I've come to learn, is that you can look back and you can be proud of some of the changes and some of the things we've done, but there is never a moment where there's not something else to improve. There's always something to improve. And so that's been an exciting thing for me, but also, something that reminds me more of us need to kind of keep coming on board and keep moving, because there's just more work to do. There's more things to do with it. So
that is so true. And I do find it interesting that you came to chaplaincy with your business background, because so many of us, like for instance, me included, I didn't get the business, the project management education before I started working as a chaplain. So I had to find some of that education myself, but it's so needed, those skills, to continue to improve the quality of what we do and to serve on those teams. Thank you for your work with that. When you became chair, Stacy, of the Commission of Certification, were these changes with the new rubric already taking place? Was it just starting? Where was that?
It had already started. So there was a subgroup of people on the commission at the time that were working on this. It was, I think in 2020, NACC, APC, commissioned a study for our certification process. And so we worked with a group of people and came together as strategic partners to kind of, and the study was done, lots of interviewing, lots of question of people who had been through the certification process, what their experience was. And ultimately what came back, which was no surprise to anyone, was just the level of subjectivity that can be involved in the interview portion of our certification process. And so collectively, the response to that was to create a rubric. Everyone, from what I understand, and again, I wasn't in those initial meetings, I really kind of came on the scene after, when the first big draft of the rubric was coming out. But it was kind of this idea of everyone still felt really strongly about the interview portion of the process, right? That narrative, that storytelling, that giving real life examples and being able to say that in a way that you can tell it is an integrated part of a chaplain, who they are. They're not just kind of rattling off a theoretical competency, but that you can hear the integrations through the storytelling, through the narrative. We all felt like that the interview piece of our process was still very important, but how we were, as committee members, determining if that met or did not meet our competency, there's lots of room for interpretation on that, right? And so this rubric was the thing that they determined that this can help.
Do you mind if I ask you, because I was thinking about making a comment, because you're talking about the rubric. Is it okay if I bring up your Doctor of Ministry? Because in a lot of courses, that's something that's is it okay if I ask you about that?
Yes. I mean, now I'm actually becoming real familiar with rubrics because of that's just kind of mainstream now.
One of the things that we talked about offline, and you said is okay, was you're currently doing a Doctor of Ministry program. What I've seen in a lot of classes these days, which I really appreciate, is the presence of a rubric. These are the areas where, okay, if you just want this grade, you have to do this. Mm-hmm. If you want this grade, you do this. Mm-hmm. It's this very objective, you've presented this, this, and this. Whereas with what you're talking about, the subjectivity of a lot of the presentations, I remember hearing some people on boards where they were listening for well, I want this person to have an A+++, and they need to be an expert in their field for me to allow them to become board certified. Whereas what I've been telling people consistently is the board should be looking at, are you professional? Are you competent? So if you give voice to how the rubric was developed and highlight certain pieces of that.
I'll speak to, yes, my personal experience right now being back in an educational environment with my doctorate is this is the first formal study that I've done that all the professors use a rubric. And it has been extremely helpful. This is exactly what I'm looking for. If I'm asking you to write a paper, I want to make sure it includes, a good thesis, and I want it to include this, and this. And that for me is so helpful to see, there's not a mystery. It's I still have to produce the information. I still have to write a coherent paper or do a coherent presentation. And I have to have drawn upon all the materials that I've been reading and everything that I've learned. I still have to come up with what it is I want to say, but there is zero mystery as to what exactly that professor is looking for to grade me on this. And so that is what I hope how people perceive the benefit of a rubric like this for the certification process is it gives a lot more detailed information on the document itself. It does have the 4 different columns, which is normal for how rubrics are developed, right? So you can see more of a delineation of you're kind of there, but you're not quite there. Then yes, you are doing exactly what I'm asking you to do. And then beyond that, there's a column 2 that exceeds the competency, which is kind of what you were talking about. There are some committee members, I think, that in their mind, what they think is competent is really functioning, above competency. It really is looking for expertise in something, so it's helping the committee hold each other accountable to their discussion too, because you can more clearly see what, I really do think that maybe you're asking for something in this exceeds column when you're pushing the candidate on this, where they really are meeting the competency. One, it's good for the committee members because it helps them work together better, I think, to hold each other accountable. But then it's this huge gift to the candidate to be able to say, look, if you really want to prepare for this and you want to be successful with this, this is what we're looking for. And you're not giving them the answers. You're just giving them a way to think through what the competency is that we're looking for.
Yeah, that's great, because what I hear you say is that this document will clarify expectations for everybody in that committee. So the candidate coming in can have a lot of anxiety about how are they assessing me on these competencies. May not really know what they're looking for. And as a committee member, you know what you're looking for, but it may be very different from the person next to you. So having a document that really spells out, these are the expectations, really is helpful to everybody.
Again, it's not going to completely take away subjectivity because there's still going to be the human aspect of all of this that's going to be involved. It has brought some clarity, we hope. Even some of just the ways that we had stated the competency before through this process of developing the rubric, some of the language changed a little bit on some of them. So there's been 29 written competencies and there were 2 observable competencies. And so we've been talking about how we have 31 competencies for a long time. But with these changes, we have deleted the 2 observable because one was about professional attire, and our profession, that varies. I mean, your attire for your work at a peds hospital could be a t-shirt and scrubs, or for me, it could be a suit every day. So how you show up, that's contextual. And so to try to judge people on that or determine if you think they look professional or not, we kind of. And then the second observable one was about how professional their writing is. Well, that's already being addressed, when you are deciding if somebody's written a competency well or not. So anyway, those have gone away. So we're down to these 29 written competencies. And so none of the actual competencies have changed. Some of the wording has changed, which we think clarifies again what we're asking for, and then the rubric helps even more so clarify. I would say there are 3 that we did add something to the competency to kind of make it have a little more depth to it. And so, for example, the one in the PIC, the professional identity competency section, which that whole PIC section, that is about the chaplain being able to articulate understand their own identity, understand like a lot of self-awareness stuff is what I would say. I would categorize that whole section as like, you need to have good self-awareness as a professional chaplain. And so when you articulate those competencies, that kind of helps demonstrate that. So that second competency, PIC2, articulate ways in which one's feelings, values, assumptions, culture, and social location affect your practice. And we added the words culture and social location. That was not in there before, but we do believe that a person's culture and their personhood, their social location really does impact the way that they are in practice with people. So I'll stop there as just like one example, and y'all can keep asking me about anything specific, but I'll break for a minute and see where we are.
That's very interesting. One of the things for our audience I wanted to clarify is that all these are on the APC website. So they're able to see everything that's here. It's on I believe it's apchaplains.org, is it?
Yes. And you can click on the Become Certified if you're, and it's open to anybody. You don't have to be a member to get into that section. But I want to become certified. You click on that link, and then it gives you lots of resources that have all these documents on there. There's even what I called like a change management document on there that puts 2 different columns that had the language of how the competency was written before February of 2024, and then bumped up against this current new language so that people can quickly see like, oh, that's what they changed about that. Oh, they added the word culture, they added the word social location. But for these other 10 competencies, like it was nothing changed. It's written exactly the same. So that document's on there, and then the rubric is on there. And then the one thing that's on the way is an updated writing guide. Because the one thing we realized too is that we've had a writing guide to help people give them prompting questions to help them write their responses. And at one point we were like, oh, we don't need a writing guide anymore because we have the rubric. It has all this information on there. But we also, through this process, have realized like those 2 documents kind of serve 2 different purposes. Like the rubric helps with the evaluative piece of it, but the writing guide still does kind of help candidates be prompted to know like how to write responses to these things. And so we are in the process of updating the writing guide to be an additional tool. And yes, all that's on there, like no secrets, like here it all is. Like we're not trying to trip people up. We want people to be successful with this. Like I want people to feel confident in their competencies. And this helps you see like, this is what we believe. And it's going to keep changing. It's going to keep evolving. But today, this is what our strategic partners agree upon, that this is what will make you, if you can demonstrate these 29 things, then you are a competent chaplain, right? And so that's all we're trying to do, is to make sure that the people that are out there have the title chaplain, and especially want to, say they're a professional chaplain, that we can trust and believe that somebody has attested to hearing and witnessing that somebody is competent in these 29 different areas.
Absolutely. I love that transparency and the specificity that the writing document and the rubric will bring to this process, and hopefully take some of that anxiety away that a lot of candidates have had, or even some distrust, in the process. So Stacy, you were talking a little bit about adding the social context awareness and the cultural awareness to one of the competencies. About that, I think that is helpful too, is that the committees are not local anymore. It used to be that when I was certified, I went to a local committee in person, and that's becoming less of a reality. It's either at another location or more likely virtual anymore. So I like that gives the candidate an opportunity to talk about their social context and how that may apply to their ministry. But I wonder too, if you've heard any feedback, or what is your experience of moving the committees to a virtual context or a national conference context versus local? What's your experience of that?
I'll start by just saying almost all positive feedback around the virtual model. Now, did it start out that way? No, because everyone was anxious about it, right? When we were forced to do it, when COVID hit. I mean, there were some local areas that were either that week, they were in the middle of actual in-person interviews when things started shutting down and we started to not have flights be able to take off in that March 2020 timeframe or whatever. And so I, again, was not as involved as I am now, but I know that this pivoting was very challenging, and it was challenging for everybody to kind of move to this virtual model. But now that we're, several years beyond that, most everyone, we all have figured out how to be ourselves and to kind of present an authentic self in the virtual setting. And so honestly, we've now moved to where we have 3 virtual sessions for our certification interviews a year. And we have about 160 people at each of those sessions. Last year, in the last 12 months, we interviewed, I think, 492 candidates. We've certified over 400 candidates. And that's been the last several years, that's what it's been. We still have this many people coming to us for certification. And so to do that, the overwhelming response that I get, because I moderate a lot of those sessions and I'll be the host and be the host for the volunteers in our membership who have volunteered to do it, but then also for the candidates. And most people, one, it's much more cost effective. I mean, before, when you were doing it in areas, people were often having to drive or fly to get to the location where the interviews were taking place. I know even for me in my area in Texas, often they would decide to do the interviews in Dallas, which is 4 hours away from me here. And I rarely volunteered. I think I volunteered one time, but even to take a couple of days to go to Dallas for a couple of days, I didn't fit that into my schedule. And so virtual has opened up this opportunity for our members all across the country, solo chaplains in a hospital, somewhere in the Midwest or whatever, that would have never been able to leave their campus or their hospital for the day or 2 days to go volunteer, now have an opportunity because you can find a 4-hour block of time to log into Zoom to be a part of something like this. So people have really enjoyed the fact that it's opened up the opportunity for more people to be a part of the process. It's more cost effective on everybody's front. And then the candidates express feeling a much lower sense of anxiety. They're can have their own cup, their comfort cup of tea right there in front of them. They're sitting in their own space, and that already brings down their anxiety. And so that in and of itself, people love it. Now, let's also acknowledge that we have lost something because of this too, right? The area model where geographically people were getting together and volunteering like this, that was, aside from the annual conference, those are the opportunities that people were getting to come together and see their colleagues and share a meal together and experience these interviews together. And that social connection was really, it was important for our collegiality, and so many things come out of that when we're able to see our colleagues. And so that's been felt, that people miss that. And so I think trying to find ways to recreate some of those opportunities outside of the certification process, I think is something as APC we need to think about for membership, right? But I think for the actual certification process, this seems to be the way to move forward.
I also heard from a couple of people just concerned about the fact that the people that they are being interviewed by in the certification committee don't really understand the context that they're practicing in. So I think having that specified in the rubric will hopefully help with that, because it will allow people to discuss that directly. What other changes, Stacy, to competency have come about?
The other couple ones that I would highlight is PPS 3, which is the professional practice section. PPS 3 talked about providing spiritual care that respects diversity, and we added race to the list. So to show that somebody is able to provide spiritual care to a person of a different race, of a different culture, of a different gender, of a different sexual orientation. The other thing that we explicitly stated on the rubric was that it's somewhere in your written work, you have to give examples for each one of those categories, if you will. Whereas before, the way it was written, it was like, hey, just give me one example of when you've been in had an encounter with somebody who's different than you, right? And you could just your whole paper, all your writing could be with somebody that is of your same race and your same gender, that maybe that's all, but you had this one time where you can point to a diversity experience. And this one really is kind of calling people to say no, we want to see this where you can be practicing, professional chaplaincy in all these different diverse contexts. And some people, we have gotten feedback that will say look, I am being honest. I'm in an environment where I just don't encounter people that are of a different sexual orientation than me. And maybe, they just don't realize it or whatever. It's not seemingly unknown, right? And so we've given some leeway in those where it says in the rubric, if you do not have an experience with this particular diverse encounter, then kind of almost well, okay, hypothetically, what would you do? We're still not letting you get a pass on that, but because we do think that even you're a professional chaplain regardless of where you're serving now. If we're going to certify you as a board certified chaplain, then that means you should have the competency to be in any different setting, right? And even if your setting right now maybe isn't that diverse, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to practice in a diverse setting, The other thing that we kind of opened up was on ITP 2. That's where it talks about providing spiritual care that incorporates a working knowledge of an academic discipline that is not religious or spiritual. And then we give some examples like psychology or sociology or anthropology or history. And the emphasis on this now is to really say, we care for people in a holistic way, right? If your only lens is some theological or religious spiritual lens, and that is the only thing you've studied, the only thing you know, that's it, you're going to be missing out on a whole host of other things about a person that may come up in a spiritual care encounter. And so we want professional chaplains to have, I'm not an expert in sociology or anthropology or history, but I have some theories around those things, some broad things that deal with humanity and help me understand a person, right? And so to be able to articulate some of that is important. And so we've kind of helped people see that it's broad. It's not just psychology or sociology. I think before there was this kind of, it felt a little more tunneled in, okay, you have to know psychology or psychology things. And it seemed like we were just focused in on psychology or sociology. And so this has kind of widened it to say no, there's other things out there. What is it that informs you about humanity and about people beyond their spiritual religious framework, right?
So for a candidate who's getting ready to apply for board certification, we know there's a lot of information on the website. There's a lot of new guides to help through those essays and the committee itself. But can you also talk a little bit about the mentorship program and other resources that people might have to prepare?
One, I will say that, okay, so we have somebody that's joined our commission recently, Michael Lee, who has a lot of passion around the mentorship program, if you will. And I will just say that there's not a real formal program in place right now, but we are building it through his leadership. There are lots of people in our world that will say that they are a mentor for the certification process, right? And it's just what does that mean? Are you trained on the rubric? Do you really understand what it is? Do you understand what we're looking for? Do you know how to navigate our website? Do you understand? There's all these different things that people seek out mentors for very different reasons too. Like they don't need the help with the kind of what I would call the process of going through the process, like navigating the website or navigating the portal or navigating like all the different things besides the writing. You have to figure out how to accumulate and submit. There's some people that just need help with the process itself. Then there's some people that administratively, they kind of like understand all that, but they want somebody to read their responses and give them feedback on like, do you think this is really meeting the need for that? So there's different reasons why people would want a mentor. So we're trying to help people articulate what they want out of a mentor and just do a better matching of like who our mentors are, how they've been trained, what they've been trained to do, and what do people want out of a mentor, and just get a little bit better at like a mentor match. In our big dream world, what I would be looking for if I were a candidate right now and I wanted a mentor, one, you can call the national office and say, I'd like a mentor. And we usually by default kind of work with your state representative. We'll connect you with your state representative. And usually that state representative knows different people in their state that they could make referrals to for the mentor program. And so that one, just know that's a resource. Call the national office, ask to be given some, a contact for being matched with a mentor. But if I were a candidate, I would also encourage you and empower you to ask some questions of whoever that mentor is. I would say, are you familiar with the rubric? Like, have you worked with the rubric? Like, I'd want to make sure that whoever you're asking to be your mentor is up to speed with where we are and what we're doing, right? And so not just to have somebody with maybe an old school thought from 20 years ago that's not going to be familiar with where we are and what we're doing now. So in the meantime, until we get a more formalized program, that would be my suggestion for anyone looking to go through the process and looking to get a mentor, is to ask really good questions of a potential mentor and ask them what their experience is. How recent have they served on committees? What kind of orientations have they done recently? What kind of training have they done on the rubric? Because then you're more confident that, okay, they really know what's happening now,
You may have already addressed this, but I was wondering if somebody wants to volunteer to be a mentor or get more experience in training as a mentor, what can they do?
That's a good question. So I'll tell you about one other thing too, which can kind of be maybe seen as a little bit of a both and. People are starting to hear us talk about certification specialists, and these are people who are really have a lot of interest in being a part of the certification process. They want to serve on committees. They typically want to mentor people. They're just invested, kind of like I was saying in the beginning, how I just actually loved this part of our organization, like the whole process in and of itself. And so there are people who want to serve on committees faithfully. Every time there's an opportunity, they want to do it. So we probably have about 60 people right now that are identified as certification specialists. And those are the people that we are doing more intensive training with. Like I did a webinar with the certification specialists that we went through every single competency and we talked out loud, like what we really mean by that competency, and spent an hour and a half just talking through the competencies. And so that was really helpful because they're the ones that are going to help. In an ideal world, we want a certification specialist to serve as the chair of the certification committee. So we would, in an ideal world, again, like I said, every person that comes forward and has a group of, we always make up our committees of 3 to 4 board certified chaplains, that the person serving as the chair that will facilitate the interview, that will make sure things, if things start going off track, they can kind of pull it back together, that person has had more intensive training. And so if you'd like to be a certification specialist because you have been serving on lots of committees and you are invested in that, on our AP Chaplains webpage, there's a big volunteer button on the homepage. And if you click on that, then on the right-hand side, you'll see certification specialist application. And it's just a basic application with your information, but then it indicates like, yes, I've already served on 5 committees. this is what I think is important about the certification process, and then add you to our group and kind of get you up to speed on the training. So now to circle back to your original question about I want to be a mentor, more to come on that. Like, just as we've seen us do intentional call outs in our APC Connect newsletters that go out every 2 weeks or so, there will be more formal calls for, do you want to be trained as a formal mentor for BCCI? And people can respond to that when they see that call. But in the interim, I consider what it would look like to kind of get on board with the certification specialist thing too, because that training is going to be very similar. Like, we want a mentor to have really done everything that a certification specialist has done too. It's the difference would be you're not really interested in maybe serving on committees all the time, but both of those people, a mentor and a certification specialist, really do need to have a good handle on our competencies and the rubric.
I know you've already addressed the training, but what do you think makes a good mentor or somebody to walk alongside somebody who's getting certified? What should be the way that we support those candidates? Or how would you like that to be embodied?
I think with any mentoring relationship, regardless of the context, I mean, some best practices are when you meet for the first time, really articulating what the needs are, what the expectations are, what the needs are, so this would be the candidate identifying and saying, okay, I'm trying to meet the October 31st deadline. And it's June 25th today. How often do you, potential mentor, have the time to meet with me? Is this something we can meet, once a month? And just good communication on what that looks like. Do they want to be on Zoom? Do they want to just facilitate back and forth commenting through email? Do they need to set up a timeline for how to keep everybody kind of on track so that you're not the week before trying to ask a lot of a mentor to say, like, can you read all this stuff really quick before I submit, hit the submit button? So I think, for me, it's just like, it's good communication. It's setting deadlines. It's setting good expectations for what you need so that the candidate can get what they need and the mentor can feel like they are helping in the way that they, that's the most effective and is, what they need this coming alongside. And then again, if the mentor is also feeling like they're not sure if they're up to speed or they understand, people reach out to me personally, or they'll reach out to the office and just say, hey, I'm mentoring somebody, but I'm a little confused on X, Y, or Z. Is there somebody that can talk to me about this? And so I would also say a good mentor is just like what I was saying, making sure you feel confident that you know where we are right now with best practices for our certification process.
I agree. I think that's what the mentors that I've seen who have been the most successful, and this is a good leadership lesson too, are those who are confident enough to go, oh, I don't know about this, and be able to reach out to people who do. That's the best kind of mentor that I've had, because being able to have people who are able to say, that's interesting. Okay, let me ask somebody about that.
What more work do you think still needs to be done with the certification process? You said there's always something to improve. What's next on your to-do list?
I can think of two big things that the commission we are working on. One is our education requirements for certification. We have for decades, if you were to look at, what do you require for education? It'll say 72-hour Masters of Divinity or equivalent, right? So like we've been bumping everything up against a Masters of Divinity degree. And with as diverse and broad as we want APC to be, and we want to keep growing and getting wider and wider and wider as far as, inclusivity with people in different spiritual traditions, faith traditions, like it's harder and harder to keep bumping what their training and formation has been to what has just been a very Christocentric, Masters of Divinity. So we know that it is time to really assess that. Right now, our requirements is it's a 72-hour degree. And years back, we expanded that. It could be a degree in philosophy or a degree in, several different sociology, different things like that. But we also have held to 24 hours of your degree has to be in these particular topics, like there has to be a world religions class, or there has to be a sacred text for whatever your faith tradition is. So there's a couple different things. There's 24 hours worth of coursework that we feel like, or that currently is stated that this we think is important for your own formation and whatever your own spiritual religious tradition is. Like, this is important for you to feel like a grounding in whatever it is your own spiritual religious tradition is. But there are more and more institutions that are responding to the fact that chaplaincy is a growing profession, that more and more people are feeling called to chaplaincy as a first call and not a second career or a second call. And so there are institutions, both schools of theology and sacred, institutions and secular institutions, that are creating degree programs to train chaplains. They're creating chaplaincy degrees. And what we're finding is that no one's creating a 72-hour degree. Like, that's just kind of like, one, do we need 72 hours? Is that what you need? And so those questions that are now being dealt with a task force that was appointed by the board of APC. It has several of us on the commission on it, but it also has other membership that's on it, that we are assessing like what it is that we think at the end of the day will prepare you from a formal education standpoint. It will still be a master's level degree, but can we reduce it and say like it needs to be a master's level degree with 54 hours or 36 hours or whatever it is. And so that's being seriously considered right now, which is, it's time to do that. And then the other thing I would say as far as our certification process is really looking at what kind of accommodation policy we need to create, thinking about English as a second language for a lot of people, thinking about kind of neurodivergent thing, that there's so many different things that like your formal educational institutions have policies around what accommodations you can make for student, that may be in any one of these categories. And so because we have such a rigorous process that requires a lot of writing, requires an oral interview, right now we're kind of, as people have the courage to call our office and say, look, I need an accommodation. I'd like to be considered for accommodation. Every time somebody calls, we work with that person. That's great, but we don't need to we need to do something more formal with it, right? Like, people need to know that we have kind of a policy around it, that this is a pathway to it, versus just somebody maybe not thinking that, but then having the courage to call and ask, and then realizing like, oh, they really will work with me on this. Like, it needs to be more open, and we need to figure out what that looks like. So I would say those are the two big things, the education piece and then thinking about accommodations.
That's really interesting. I love hearing about that. Whenever I go to any kind of conference, I always like to ask the question, who's not here at the table and who needs to be at the table? And I love that. And the thing that always came to my mind a lot of times, that it would be great to have more people who were not, where English was a second language, and where we had a diversity of languages, and an increased diversity of religions. Ed, are you able to say more to how you've made accommodations in the past, without, of course, betraying any kind of confidentiality?
I mean, one example that's kind of coming to mind that we haven't figured out what the path is, but somebody with severe, ADHD that just has a really hard time and is diagnosed and has support from a physician that's willing to meet with us to talk about like what accommodations are appropriate for somebody going, with this, like those are some that we're in the middle of kind of meeting with people. We'll even meet with a physician, like get on a Zoom call with a physician and say like, what would be helpful? Like, help teach us, tell us what would be helpful. So we're learning some of that. I don't want to misspeak and say that this feels like an accommodation, if you will. But there have been people that are transgender or have called and said, look, I don't know. I feel like I may not be understood if I don't have a committee that has somebody that either is transgender or that we know is an affirming person and that understands this. And we go not out of the normal process, but we are intentional about finding people to make up a committee that we know will be an affirming and understanding and a fair committee versus like thinking about like, oh, names on a spreadsheet. You could be pulling somebody from some very wildly, just has totally different viewpoints. And while as professional chaplains, we should be able to be with people and understand people in their different social locations, like we know that is harder for some people to do than others, right? So I know for these last couple rounds of interviews, we've been very intentional about, and maybe that's not an appropriate way to talk about accommodation. So I feel like I'm not sure if that's, if that is providing an accommodation, but I'm just saying there's different things that people face. I mean, the English as a second language for sure. I mean, people have called us and said, can you please make sure that there's a Spanish speaker on my committee? Because I am going to do this interview in English, but if it's not translating right and we're having a hard time, I will feel better knowing that somebody that speaks my language can help make sure that the intent and that what I'm trying to get across is really getting across, So the language one is the big one too.
No, thanks for expanding on that. Those will be topics that we'll be addressing in the future. I think I work with my hospital with a business resource group that it deals with accessibility issues. So one of the things that I've been learning and I've been continually learning is that it's a continual conversation. So, and I'm going to make mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes. I might misspeak. But similar to chaplaincy, what I learned from going through the process of becoming board certified was that for me, it provided me that opportunity to go, oh, now I have this baseline level of skills. Now I need to keep on learning. I need to keep on developing.
Right. Well, thank you, Stacy, for spending this time with us and let us get a glimpse into all the work that the Commission of Certification is doing. And we're really grateful for all the work you are doing. And I love how you speak about the value in certification and also making it a better process for our members and for the candidates. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. And if anybody has specific questions, or one of the things I didn't talk about, but I often am asked, and if I can't do it, we find somebody on the commission to do it, is to do general orientations to the certification process as a whole. We have an entire, hour to hour and a half kind of presentation lined out on a PowerPoint that CPE educators reach out to me and say, hey, can you zoom in and do a didactic for my students to help them understand and answer all their questions about endorsement and the whole process in general. And I love doing stuff like that. So I do those often. And again, if I can't do them myself, somebody from the commission will do them. So again, my hope is that as somebody that's sitting in this role as the chair on the commission right now, is to continue to invite as many people into this process as possible, to educate them, to help them feel like it's a transparent process that multiple people are a part of and that we're teaching people about and we have good information out on the website about. And so any way that I can help make that better, I'm here to do that.
We'll link on the episode description the web address for all the certification information on the APC website, our voicemail number, if people have additional questions and other ways that people can find information. Maybe, Stacy, after we do some more work with certification, we can have you back in the future to continue this conversation.
Yeah, I would love that anytime. And I hope to, in addition to the podcast, which I love, I think this is a great way to communicate to our members and to people interested in chaplaincy. I'm happy to be a guest at any time. So thank y'all for the invitation.
And one thing we always like to ask people before we leave is, what's giving you life these days?
Oh, goodness. Well, as much as that doctorate of ministry program is a pain in my side right now in a lot of ways, it has surprisingly been life-giving for me. It has challenged me to think about things differently. It has opened my mind up about things. It feels like another kind of second season of who I am as a leader, and being able to cast vision, to be more empowered to, within my own institution, speak truth to power, to think about what my role and leveraging my role as the system director to kind of fight for different justice issues and make change. Like, my world's kind of getting shaken up a little bit through this program and the books that I've been reading and things like that. So trying to figure out what God may be calling me to do with that. But it has also been very, very life-giving for me to think about things differently and to kind of pull myself out of an administrative rut that I feel like I may have been in for a few years, and really think about what the next 10 years my life would look like as an administrator in a hospital system.
Yeah, I love that.
What will be giving me life in about 3 days is that my family, we're taking a 2-week vacation to Italy, and I am over the moon excited about that. So I will proactively say that is certainly going to be giving me life, and something that I'm really looking forward to experiencing with my family.
Absolutely. And I hope that you don't answer to emails and voicemails on vacation.
It'll be a hard stop. It will be turned off. So
good.
That's great. Yeah, just say no to Outlook. Well, thank you so much, Stacy. I really enjoyed, and I've enjoyed our conversation today, and I think it's been very informative as we move forward with the professionalization of our beautiful calling as chaplains. So I thank you so much for taking this time.
Yeah, thank y'all again for having me. I'll talk to y'all soon.
That was a really fascinating discussion that we just had with Stacy.
It was, and it took me back to when I was getting certified as a chaplain, but also remembering when I first got my job at the hospital, because after residency, I was a hospice chaplain for several years, and then I moved back to the hospital setting as a chaplain manager, and I had put my framed certification on the wall, so it said Professional Chaplain Association, Certified Chaplain. And I remember somebody came to my office for something, and he said, "What does that mean to be a professional chaplain?" To be able to explain the importance, the value of that. I love that this conversation reminded me of why it is important for us to demonstrate these competencies, but also what it means for a committee to be able to validate that and say, yes, we believe that you meet the qualifications and the competencies as a professional chaplain, and we are confident that you are able to provide that ministry to that service to patients in any setting.
Absolutely. I enjoyed that suburb that I was remembering the time when I drove from where I worked, which was in Central Kentucky, to Lexington, Kentucky, to physically show up in a boardroom in this hospital that I'd never been in, to meet 5 people who I've never met. And it was very nerve-wracking, but it is kind of funny. You hear some stories of people's board certification process, and you hear the horror stories where people are like, oh, well, there was that one person who just kept on holding back because they thought that I didn't do X, Y, and Z. For some reason, they had some sort of axe to grind with me. Mine was not that way at all. Mine was very life-giving, very redemptive, of that I had been engaging the process and going through and providing competent care. And so for me, being able to, after that, I ended up thanking a lot of the people who were serving on my committee, because they said some things that I hold to this very day, that very tender. And it was a lot of things that they said were very prophetic to me. I don't mind sharing. One of them was, John, we think, you're dealing with death a lot, because I was dealing with hospice. One of the things I'd love to see more in your materials would be, how do you engage with joy? I go, oh, okay. Oh, yes. And so that's been something that I've been focusing on more and more since then, and that was over 10 years ago.
That's great. I had an affirming experience as well, and I too have heard stories from people who had a very different experience. And I remember just feeling so excited when I got that feedback that yes, I was certified, and just feeling so excited and thinking about, it does take a lot of work, both writing the essays, but also before that, and then to be able to articulate that to your committee. So to be able to have that response is very positive. So my hope listening to what the Commission for Certification has been working on, it gives me hope that more people will have that positive experience. They will come in more prepared. The committees will be better prepared to assess candidates so that it can be this life-giving, affirming experience for chaplains through certification. I mean, that's what we want. I loved how Stacy said, we want you to be competent. We want you to succeed. That is the purpose.
Yeah, no, I agree. And ultimately, the thing that is the most important, it is important that people go through the process of becoming board certified, because it's extremely important that if people are going to be representing chaplains, especially when the word chaplain can be thrown around all too easily in this day and age, far more important than the certification itself is what it demonstrates. It means that you are providing professional care, inclusive care that's compassionate and that is informed by the religion, the spirituality, or the humanist background of the patient, the team member, the staff member, the family member that we're caring for, because otherwise, why are we even there?
Right. And I know that a lot of people feel like you have to jump through a lot of hoops to become certified as a chaplain, but this shouldn't be just a formality or hoop to jump through. It really is and it's supposed to be a meaningful process. I recall there was a time in my chaplaincy career where I felt like either my energy was low, maybe I was approaching burnout, or was just not feeling as validated in my work, perhaps, where I carried with me my ordination vows, which is kind of interesting. It was for me, it was a very good reminder of why I was doing what I was doing. And I was reminded of that when Stacy was talking about how she enjoyed that process in her church, the ordination process, and helping people through that. And I think this, even though it's not an endorsement, it's not an ordination, but it's similar in the way of upholding to us why we do what we do and what it means to provide that care for people.
I think that was beautifully said. I agree. There seemed to be something, I want to be inclusive of the many people and the groups that are represented by APC, but for me, it felt very sacramental as well, where it was this idea of, I went through this process and I had received from my peers this certification that said, yes, you provide professional care, which I thought was a beautiful touch.
I also loved how Stacy talked about volunteering with APC and how she, at some points, was invited or asked to do certain things, but she also applied. For instance, she talked about how she applied to be a board member and received the feedback that she needed some more leadership experience before doing that. I had the same experience. So I also volunteered with APC conference planning committees. John, you and I were in the same planning committee once. I did that several times. I also volunteered as a state continuing education chair representative, and I applied to be a board member. I think it was in 2020, and the response that I got was, we need you to have a little bit more time with the local state leadership. And so I continued that for a couple more years before applying again. And I think the message in that is, it's okay if people tell you no at first, or if you don't pass your certification committee the first time, you have to have a subsequent appearance, or you try to be part of a committee and it's just not the right time, to stay engaged and to continue to have community around you, to look at ways that can really ignite your passion. I love that this is a passion for Stacy. That's something that she enjoys doing, and there's so much opportunity within APC to be involved in things that light up your passion, your joy, like you said.
Yeah. And as a supervisor, one of the things that people have asked me is, hey, I'm serving on a board for board certification. What can I do? I said, well, I support that. That's professional development. So being able to support my team members, the people who report either to me indirectly or directly, was something that was very simple that I was willing to, it was very low cost to be able to say, yes, it's important for you to take that time so you could know what is expected and to support those who are going through the process that you've already been through. No, I agree. I think it was beautiful how she had mentioned how there are people who are able to specialize in leading some of those boards, some of the interviews, and being able to, it just takes more and more people to volunteer, which takes time.
I think it is important to have a mentor, or at least people who understand where you are and who know you and are supportive of you. When I went through, I don't know if you had any mentors, John, but when I was going through the certification process, there were 2 or 3 of us in my organization who were applying, and my supervisor at the time served as our mentor, and her help was really invaluable, just from even her help with how to organize our documents, because back then it was all paper, in this binder, and how to make it easy for the committee members to review them. But also she read through our materials, she gave us feedback. That was really helpful to me. So I love that we are having more of an intentional process for developing mentors and certification specialists.
I completely agree. Alicia, I know we're coming up to the end of our time. It's just a beautiful quote that I believe applies to our beautiful calling as chaplains. He says, when we honestly ask ourselves which persons in our lives mean the most to us, we often find that it is those who, instead of giving much advice, solutions, or cures, have chosen rather to share our pain and touch our wounds with a gentle and tender hand. The friend who can be silent with us in a moment of despair or confusion, who can stay with us in an hour of grief and bereavement, who can tolerate not knowing, not curing, not healing, and face with us the reality of our powerlessness. That's the friend who cares.
That's beautiful. That speaks to so many of us in the work that we do. Thanks, John. Thank you, listeners.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lacey. Bye-bye.